It's a very special day for us. It's special for Manitoba, for Winnipeg, for Canada, and for everybody who has any commitment to the pursuit, the protection, propagation of human rights based on principles of liberty, individual freedom, and democratic equality of all citizens. We're celebrating today, as you know, the 21st anniversary of the enactment of the I say epoch-making Canadian Charter of Rights. It's also the anniversary of Equality Day, when the women of Canada were elevated to their appropriate and rightful place in citizenship with the bringing in of the for me personally, it's the 30th anniversary of the year that I stood in the Manitoba legislature and introduced a bill to enact the Manitoba Bill of Rights. One of your colleagues, Mr. Premier, was unwilling to bring it to a vote, so today is called Asper's Revenge. It's also the 20th anniversary of the founding of the Asper Foundation. It was quite fledgling at the time, and when it was set up that year, in '83, it's the time I went to Prime Minister Trudeau and said, look, your magnum opus is the Canadian Charter of Rights, and a national institution should be launched to teach its values and the precepts of it. Well, today is, I think, that day. So it's really an appropriate day to be announcing the things we're announcing today. And the things we're making public today are, firstly, we've incorporated the Friends of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights for the purpose of building, designing, and outfitting a 17-acre site here on City and Forks land, right at the heart of downtown Winnipeg, facing the historic St. Boniface Basilica and connected to it by the soon-to-be-open $20 million footbridge that joins the east and the west. Next, the Friends Corporation has been granted charitable status by the Canadian Customs and Revenue Agency, meaning that contributions to this project will now be tax deductible. Next, we're announcing a unique partnership between the federal government, the province, the city, and the private sector, as we represent, who've all come together to fund this vision. We're also announcing the first ever, an unprecedented coalition of private sector communities and organizations consisting of Jewish, Aboriginal, Ukrainian, Japanese, Chinese, Franco-Manitoban, Canadian Francophonie, Acadians, and gays and lesbian organizations, all coming together here today to speak with one voice in support of a museum and the telling of their stories in that museum. Many of the leaders of those communities are here today, and you'll be introduced to them later, I think. Other groups who I didn't mention will be added to during the consultative process, which now begins. But we believed we had sufficient critical mass of support with the main constituencies in Canada to go ahead and make this public. We're announcing that this project is the largest ever private or public assembly venue ever done in Manitoba's history. It's going to be a two-phase proposition. First phase being estimated to cost $200 million, and a second phase to follow, which would cost an additional $70 million, making a grand total of $270 million. We've proposed a funding mechanism, still in discussion, but we've proposed that the federal government contribute 50%, the city 10%, the province 10%, and we've said if they'll do that, we, the Asper Foundation, representing the private sector and the Friends of the Museum, we've undertaken to raise the remaining 30%. The commitments that are being tabled today total $130 million of the $200 million needed for Phase A. Obviously, we aren't going to begin construction until the remaining $70 million is in place. But now the Canadian Friends the Friends of the Canadian Museum can formally be organized, and we will shortly launch a national campaign to raise our share of the money, which is currently estimated at $60 million. As for the other participants, negotiations at the government level are ongoing. I might say ongoing and ongoing and ongoing, but I won't. We're announcing that I see you haven't got an information kit. I'm told that there's information kits available for everybody someplace at the back. Make sure you get one and have a look at the details. Otherwise, I'm going to abbreviate my remarks. But you'll see that an internationally recognized team of all Canadian museum consultants, joined by others, professionals, have been developing the plans, the specifications, the sculpture garden, landscaping, exhibits, and operating plans. We're announcing also that an international competition will shortly be launched for architectural design of the museum. But the mandate to those submitting proposals will be that this is to be a signature physical, artistic icon of Winnipeg to Canada, but of Canada to the world. The costs that I've referred to earlier also include endowment funds to be able to produce the income necessary to bring 100,000 Canadian high school students to the museum every year. This museum will be, in my opinion, truly national in the sense that not only will we bring people to it, we will take it to people. This museum will travel, physically travel, and it will be on the internet as a virtual museum and available to every nook and cranny and school of Canada by way of satellite. Well, those are the highlights of what we're announcing, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions about what will the economic impact on the city, the government, the federal government, provincial government, how many jobs will be created, and what will the components be in the museum. And that's why I suggest that you pick up that information package at the back of the room. Mo will tell you where it is, so that you can have those questions answered. In that kit, you'll find a 12-page news release, plus news releases from the 3 levels of government, which should give you those detailed answers. You'll find, when you look at it, the benefits to the public, the supporting organizations, and the participating governments, all 3 levels, are enormous. They are simply enormous. It's truly a home run, since we're near CanWest Global Park. But it's a home run with the bases loaded. I think you'll agree that we're going to create something that will be inspiring and a sobering experience from the 300,000 visitors we expect to visit the museum every year. It will have a profound impact on, and it'll change the lives and the outlooks of people who visit it. The components will include exhibits, electronic displays, storytelling galleries, theaters, cinemas, TV studios, and I believe the messages that emanate from the museum will proclaim Canada's claims to fame, as well as our recognition of our shames. We've had failures in human rights, and we've had successes. All told, we have one of the most tolerant and inclusive societies in the world. It will create an overwhelming learning experience for all of our visitors, and the museum will change. It will not be static. Its content will change routinely. But I do refer to fame and shame because the museum has to face squarely the blemishes on our human rights records. We can celebrate our evolution to the enlightened Charter of Rights, but we had missteps and darker days along the way. One of the two architects of today, Pierre Trudeau, isn't here. But I can tell you, he would have been thrilled to have heard this and to join us. The other architect of that Charter of Rights that's inspired this gathering is the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, I want everyone to know, has supported and encouraged this project from the first day I approached him several years ago. It's only his unavoidable absence from Canada that keeps him from being with us, but it is quite emblematic of his commitment to the project that three of his key ministers are here with us. The Honourable Sheila Cox, Minister of Heritage, who I may tell you now personally contributed an awful lot of good ideas to the concept of the project as we began talking about it several years ago, and they have now been embodied, particularly her approach to the Aboriginal partnership, which we've now forged. Also, the new Minister for Western Economic Diversification, Stephen Owen, the Honourable Stephen Owen, is the successor to our own Ron Duhamel. And you may have read in one of the papers, where, as this was leaking out that this was happening, he eloquently defended Winnipeg as the appropriate location for this museum, and I thank him for that. I might also say that even more than that, he's writing the first check, $30 million, which will be and finally, but not least, of course, our own friend, Dr. Ray Pactigan, who has been our inside mole in the federal cabinet for the last, who's told us who our friends and enemies are. I also want to, as I say, once again, recognize Ron Duhamel, because as the Minister for Western Economic Development at the time, he was the first to put both hands on the table, the first with a thumbs up, and the second with a pen to write the first check of $700,000, which launched the studies that have resulted in this. Further, the civil service, who we generally love to criticize, here's an example of people using their extraordinary skills in Ottawa and here in Winnipeg to find a way to make this thing happen. They took the idea and they turned it into the reality we have today. And they were creative, they were tenacious, they wouldn't stop, and their ingenuity is very much appreciated by all of us who've been working on this. I hope they're as proud of themselves for what they did as we are of them. I hope you take that back. I can't do that without also sharing that same words for the executive director of the Asper Foundation, Mo Levy. I have relied on him. I can't believe it, but he never once stopped believing that we were actually going to do this. And when my spirits get down, he's been the man who's driven the project and kept us believing in it. But to conclude, the pivotal support. We would not be here today if it were not for Prime Minister Sean Chrétien. So on behalf of the millions of Canadians who are going to benefit from this and learn from this, I want to offer the Prime Minister my most sincere appreciation and thanks. And last, the same has to be said about two other key partners, Premier Gary Doer and Mayor Glenn Murray. This vision, their right line, we are all, regardless of our political leanings, very fortunate to have these two men steering their respective ships of state. Each of the Premier and the Mayor eagerly signed on to this concept the instant we brought it to them. I still hold a signed $5 bill signed by the Mayor several years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, in his smoke-free office, which violates my human rights. But that was the first donation, and it will be the first to go into the bank. I have to say, too, that the willingness of the Premier to present and perfect and hammer our case in Ottawa is deeply appreciated, because he did it at a time when he had his own agenda, and that was the floodway. And it took courage and risk to raise a new several $100 million wobble for the federal government to consider. But he did it with courage, conviction, and I thank him for it. You're witnessing, today we're all part of an historic confluence of policy commitments. Here's a private sector partnership with 3 levels of government and an ironclad coalition of the Canadian cultural mosaic. It's an unbeatable combination, and it leads me to say this museum will happen.